I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a work session of the Oregon City Commission. Today is Wednesday, October 13th, and present this evening we have, well, this way then.
Oh, sorry.
Daphne West.
Jim
Nasita.
Rocky Smith.
Larry Patterson, City Manager.
Maureen Cole, Resident Director.
Conrad Police. Larry Director. Scott Archer, Facilities Director.
Dan Brentwood, Community Development.
Terry Bankhead, City Manager's Office.
Nancy Ide, City Recorder.
and Guy.
Betty Monk, Oregon City.
Colin Miner, the Oregon.
Great. Okay, this evening's agenda is we have five items, and then we will either finish before our 7 o'clock City Commission meeting, or we'll continue afterwards. I think is our plan to get through these particular items, and then we've scheduled a work session for next Tuesday also. Is that next Tuesday?
We have.
And that is
Let me check that.
yes. Larry sent out a memo.
I sent a memo, but I wanted to check on that this evening. If not, we need to.
Oh, I thought that was confirmed.
In 2 weeks, but I really have a problem with these.
Okay. But everybody else okay?
I can do it next week, but not the following week.
Okay, and then this discussion centers around facilities.
So who do we want there?
How about you, Rocky?
Can I make a request?
Either one looks fine to me.
Can you do that?
Can we start at 4?
Rocky, can you be here at
Go
4?
earlier.
Okay.
Not earlier than 4 is about as early as I can get here.
I'll have to read you before 6:30.
So
Okay.
next
Well,
Tuesday
there's
at
really
4
just, it's essentially one agenda item. It's
Yeah,
facilities, but it's, oh, you added some. Okay.
But
But the big thing is talking about all those 4 facilities and see if we can set some priorities. Yeah, it'll be tough.
So what have we decided?
So next Tuesday,
I will.
Next Tuesday at 4.
Next Tuesday at 4.
The 20th.
20th.
1 week from tonight.
And I think we'll have to be at the Pioneer Center
Is that right?
No,
No,
we
we're
can be
here.
in here.
at 4.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, no conflict with court. Okay, thank you. Next, does anybody have any items to add to the agenda this evening, or would you like to phone those in so we can get on with the discussion?
We'll just send us a copy of the next work session.
Yeah. in fact,
And we'll talk about it tonight, yeah. Okay, let's, I don't want to neglect that, but you do have that opportunity to request it at any time, and if we could move right into the discussion, you can, bring that up at any time as well, if you think of something. Okay, let's move right into talking about the city's priorities and goals. Larry.
And Mayor, member of the commission, this shouldn't take a lot of time this evening, but mainly it's just kind of to ask you to look at a couple of
Speak up,
things.
Larry.
Yeah.
Closer. It's just, yeah, there you go.
There. It's just, it's asking you to just think about a couple of things. This last year has been kind of interesting, and all city commissions are somewhat different, and it takes everyone a while to kind of get their feet on the ground, and it's not uncommon in the first goal-setting session that you come out of there maybe not as unified as what you will in the future, because a lot of it's new, and you haven't really had a chance to think of it, and you think about things, and you get a lot of things thrown at you at one time. But we've been in operation now for about a year, so I feel it's kind of my obligation to kind of point out what I think is the obvious to everyone, and that's that we've gotten back into a habit that we will tackle every issue before it's time, and some will even bring up when they're not maybe even pushing on the agenda. And I think this lack of focus on the part of the city is leading to a number of breakdowns, and I think it's also going to lead us into a lot more controversy than what we currently have, and I'll point some of that out in a moment. I have given you tonight a copy of the city projects and activities just for the next 6 months, and you'll see those kind of blacked out there. that means each of those items will require some or a lot of work during each of those months, and you'll see some right now are projected on a shorter time frame. That depends a lot on decision-making, because if we roll those over, then they'll take longer. And just when we start beginning to clear the agenda, you'll see on the backside of that, there's some others that pick up and begin to go. So that is those are just the major projects. I also put at the top of the line, and I'm sorry the ones in the lobby don't have that in blue, but yours do, the city service delivery, which I think we kind of forget from time to time, that in addition to all these major projects, we are delivering services on a broad array of fronts, and this is a very active city, and each of those departments that are handling that stuff. You also, I have at your place, you have a copy, and this is not carved in granite because there's thing to be added, but this is the agenda agendas that you're looking at over the next several meetings. And if you just think about the prep time on those, is really trying to get back to these projects. This is primarily what staff is doing right now from one meeting to the next, is just getting ready for the next meeting. And some of these projects are really beginning to suffer from that. I think the other thing that happens is you begin to throw a lot of things at the public, and that we really don't have time to really perhaps think strategically on how to move those projects forward and deal with the public, and that leads to a lot of controversy because we're just throwing a lot of things at them and perhaps not spending the quality time we need to get them on board to move forward. And that's why maybe some of the complaints that you receive continue to come up. The other thing which you'll talk about next time is facilities, and if we're going to move anything on the ballot, is I think you're going to have to start thinking about clearing that agenda, because if you have a lot of controversy and a lot of other major initiatives, first of all, you don't have time to conduct a campaign, but more importantly, you may not have the support on the issues you want to get focused on because you've got a lot of folks riled up on other issues. So the one thing I'd ask you to do is really begin to look at your agenda and what is it we want to focus on, and if we're going to add to this agenda, what do we move off the plate? Or at least, I'm not saying we don't do those things, but somehow they get scheduled for later on to pick up, and right now that's kind of what we got activity moving around. So just, again, staff's going to do whatever you ask us to do, and we're going to salute in March, but this is a little over the top.
I would like to make a couple of observations, and one is that, and I know I'm guilty as well, we've gotten into the habit of saying, let's put, or I want this put on the next agenda, rather than, I think, saying, please put this on the next open agenda, because we're all being very demanding, and I think this, I see that with staff. That's a part of the stress that I see, and I'm also seeing for the first time some things slipping through the cracks because we are being so demanding. So I would ask that we be cognizant of that. And then secondly, we're not focused on our goals. And I feel like this year, for the first time, we've gotten very we set the goals, and sometimes the things that we ask aren't under there. Some of them, of course, are immediate and urgent, and we have to deal with. But I think if we remember that we have those 6 goals, and when we ask for a new study or a new report, maybe we need to remember which goal it's under, maybe associate that. But I think this is pretty dramatic when you see how full our plate is. Just actually moving into the new city hall takes effort from everybody that's moving.
In fact, let me point out one thing. If you look at the agenda sheet, a couple of things I think you might want to think about is we are scheduled right now to move on the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. We actually will start moving on the 6th, move that weekend. When everyone shows up at work on Monday the 9th, they'll have boxes, and we want to make sure we get all the glitches out. So actually, we're going to have City Hall closed for the public on the 9th. Staff still has to be down there just to get unpacked and get operational so we can move the next day or be able to be open the next day. We have a commission meeting on the 4th, and we have a work session on the 10th. I would suggest we might want to push the work session on the 10th back, and the 4th, if we don't have pressing issues, we might want to consider not holding that meeting. Because again, just trying to get ready for those meetings and trying to move in there is a little dicey.
November 4th
You're talking
is the
November,
commission.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, November 4th is the first Wednesday. So that's the one where we would ask you please to keep your cell phones off while you're in the chambers. Thank you. Mine is. That was a little hypocritical, yeah.
Mine is supposed to be on silent. So
Yeah, mine didn't get on silent, so that's a good reminder. Okay.
you don't have to make a decision on those tonight, but I think we want to think about those two meetings, because I think those are
Aware
going
of
to be
that.
tough to really handle a very meaty agenda. And the one on November 10th, well, you have some issues there we need to talk about.
We do, so we need to probably right away get another date
Yep.
on that, so.
Maybe we can do that tonight.
You want to do that right now? I mean, it would be,
It would be easier.
okay,
Just to let you know, there's no problem with the third Tuesday.
always, okay.
We always,
If it's held earlier, then I probably can deal with it.
if all else fails, December 25th is open.
Well, December 24th is the, would be the next available time, unless you could do it on
November.
November.
November 20th.
No, it was October.
Yeah, I said December 25th.
No, no,
I didn't let you down.
oh, no, November. It is Monday, November 16th open. I know it can't be here, because that's Planning Commission, but is that something that could work?
It would for me.
And you have a council meeting...
Then we have it out on the
Wednesday.
18th. But,
That's a planning commission meeting that...
no, I realize that. That's what I said, we'd have to move to
Pioneer
Pioneer Center or
We can
something.
go to the Pioneer Center.
Well, in November, we actually will be in the other building.
Oh, that's right. We have more, maybe. But that gives us a week to
Planning
settle
Commission will still
in.
be there, though we might run into, we'll have to work around it.
Well, if the
We'll figure it out.
16th is open date for everybody? That true? Jim, Rocky, Daphne?
So
It's
far.
Monday, November 16th.
Yeah, it looks like it's
Okay,
open now.
why don't we set that down as tentative, and then we'll let staff work on where and the logistics of it, and realizing that if something, this is a work session, it's this one right here, number 7,
As far as November 10th, we're looking at November 16th.
right? So it's, that's,
At this point, the city calendar shows nothing in the evening on the 16th,
Good.
so it looks like the Chambers is free.
okay,
And then what did we decide about November 4th?
that'll be up to the
Be up to
move
really what-
and the- what pressing,
What I'm recommending, unless we don't have anything pressing, is we just cancel that meeting.
some
so
things are
we'll-
on a 100-day
We'll try to either
line.
schedule those meeting before or the meeting after, unless we just have to meet, and then we'll try to keep it as short and as succinct as we can.
Okay, any other comments on scheduling? Yeah, Daphne?
I didn't ask quick enough on the, or not on the, kind of on, I just have a question of our group. And I didn't get it at the beginning. But I
A question
wanted-
of what?
At City Commission last week, I brought up how the Clackamas Heights redevelopment project is going to be kicked off on Tuesday, November 3rd. And didn't hear an answer from my fellow commissioners if they thought this was a good idea that I sit on this advisory board or not. Or if someone else on this group wants to sit on it.
Nancy
We talked about, I
Nancy
asked
Walsh
Mr.
just-
Kabizman, but I didn't hear any feedback from you. And I'm not comfortable doing this unless I have you guys' feedback, because it probably will appear before us at some point, won't it?
Yes, it will.
So,
I'm good with that.
Yeah, me too.
I'm okay with it, too. I'm touring the site, I think, that week with Chair Peterson and Trell.
thanks for your time, because they have their first meeting tomorrow, and I didn't know.
Okay.
I didn't get it. Thank you.
Okay, good, thanks. All right, next. We through with that, Larry? Yep. All right, next. Yes.
I wanted to follow up on the city manager's comment and your comment. In looking through this list of items, proposed projects and activities, I think I can say fairly that not all of these are initiatives of the city commissioners or the commission. I can point to a few of these
No.
that came because of the initiative of staff. And I think the implication of what I heard is all of this being overwhelmed is because the city commission is not being disciplined.
No, that this is the regular work plan, and the other things that we've added, like, for instance, that are on our study sessions, like the task force on habitat, that would be different, which requires a whole set of other things. There's just several things in the work session agenda that aren't on this work.
Yeah. This is actually not pointing at anyone being called, because these issues come up are important. Part of it is when and a lot of this comes from all kinds of sources, like the solar highway is really not even an Oregon City issue, but it has resulted in work for Oregon City. Part of the conversation is with citizens, because to them, whatever issue they have is the most important issue before them. And a lot of times it's telling folks, we understand, but the city's focused here. We'll get to that next year. We'll get to it 6 months from now. We'll put it on our list to get to it. It's really how do you deal with folks, as opposed to we've got to take that issue up. It may be important, but there's really only so much we can do. Now, the flip side to that, if we want to take on more things, I think we do need to begin to look at additional resources, and I think you've got some limitations there, both budgetarily as well as, again, you have the no new programs issue that we're trying to work within as well.
Or drop something off the plate.
Or you drop something off the plate.
I think that's how you
And
deal with it.
that takes kind of a unified agreement among all parties that we're going to drop that thing down and not get to it, because, and a lot of times, I know you've asked, where is this issue at? It's not that we've forgotten it. I've got list upon list. It's just getting to it. It's going to take some time to do it because other things are pressing.
If I might, just
Doug?
looking at the list, I agree with you, Commissioner Messina, that many of these things have been on a track, particularly those dealing with streets and so forth.
Before they
Only
came on.
Molalla intersection has been on the track for some time, and then we got the money to deal with it, so we deal with it. And I think most of those things that actually deal with either street maintenance or improvements, in fact, are things that have been scheduled over a period of time, and as the money's become available, we implement them.
Yeah. Some of those projects are your major capital improvement programs, and though you may not experience what that means in terms of work, the things particularly we have to ask Public Works to do, which ends up being Ms. Crushhour, is she's got a lot of projects that she's got to stay on top of and keep operating, and those take a lot of time. A lot of it is just working through all of our partners, kind of keep them in line so we can keep these things moving, because funding comes from lots of different sources. So it's just kind of a reminder that we are very busy at this point.
And we want each of these projects to be successful, at least. I mean, I'm sure we all do. So making sure that we have the staff protected to work on them, I think, is probably the important part of the discussion. Or that we'll add more staff. Okay. Any more comments on work?
And the other thing, I'm just asking you to think about those things as other issues come up. It's not that the issues that come up aren't important, and I know somehow we're going to have to work them in at some point, sometime, but just be mindful of what you already have underway.
Okay. Let's move along then to item number 2, Oregon City garbage being releasing.
Oh, wait. I thought we were going to have kind of a discussion on this issue.
I just asked. Did you wish to have a discussion?
Yeah, I made some notes about this, and I have some suggestions.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I thought we were ready to move on. I didn't see any sign of life.
What? Two specific suggestions I want to make. One is, I noticed that the hiring of the Economic Development Coordinator is not on this list. It's on our in our list and on our agenda items, but it's not on this list. And I went through this list, and I kind of marked with a little notation ECD, where I think we could get a lot of help as far as workload and staffing issues. I found I'll give an example: the Cove project, Amtrak Phase 2. Property acquisitions, Sternwheeler, business license improvement program. I mean, a lot of these, and I even brought with me this economic development strategy back from 2004, and Mr. Leland in his recommendations had specifically mentioned that, one of the key reasons to hire an economic development coordinator was precisely to handle development projects. He mentions those in the regional center.
Jim, that's on discussion for November the 16th.
I know, but it's not on the project and activity
Well, it's not in
list.
the work program because we haven't determined to do it yet.
Even though it was originally in our goal.
It's in our goals.
Yeah, it's on our goals.
It's in our goals, but it hasn't been scheduled.
Right, but the
As a
point,
hire or
the point
anything.
I'm making is that, as far as workload, for example, the workload on the city manager, I think, could be relieved to give him time to confront all these other issues if we really make a commitment to hire that economic development coordinator and make it a priority. That was one of my points and suggestion. And the other specific suggestion I wanted to address was on this, the wastewater regional issues that's listed a couple schedules down. Also, to relieve workload on the city manager, I think that position should be a city commissioner. Just like, we have representatives to Southwark Water Board who are city commissioners, I think we could allow the city manager to spend time on more pressing issues by having that representative be one of us.
Let me point out, too, and that's fine. I don't have any objections with either of those, again, if you're targeted. But this is not necessarily about me. This is about you and what you have going. The wastewater treatment issue, whether it's the city council or the city, is going to involve
Time.
a lot of different aspects of this organization, because there's some big issues that have to be worked through here. In fact, based from last meeting, I'm working up a report on just that one little item, which seems big or small, but when you start adding everything else in there, and what all that means and what's going to have to be decided. One of the issues that's quickly coming on to that plate, for instance, has to do with these issues of mitigation, which is an important issue for Oregon City, since we're the one receiving the treatment plant. And again, we have been very patient on putting our issues aside while we could work through some of these other issues, but I keep reminding them, we have not forgotten. And luckily, some of the questions that Milwaukee has raised as a result of the Kellogg plant ties right back into what Oregon City, and luckily everyone remembers. Those are the same things we were talking about. So, and that is, again, you're going to have some interesting debates. It's going to take some energy from the city to engage in those things, because you've got some partners who not necessarily may see or they understand, they may not be willing to go down that, and that's going to take some political skills to see if we can get something out of that. So it's an energy for all of these things. Involve a little bit. It involves some of your actions. It involves a lot of different staff people here. So it's
Those are my two comments.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Now, we'll move on to the proposed rate adjustment that we're going to talk about with Oregon City Garbage and B&B Leasing. So, Pam and Mike, you want to come up here? Good to see you.
thank you.
I think we just saw you fairly recently.
Maybe it was last summer, yes, with the
Was it?
recycling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
B&B has been talking with us about the need for a rate increase, so I was going to have them explain that to you. And again, if you don't have any objections, you'll see this in one of your future, actually you'll have it on one of your future council meetings anyhow to make a decision one way or the other.
Thank you very much. My name is Mike McCoy, and this is Pam Bloom. And what we wanted to do is join this work session just to discuss a little bit about what the Clackamas County rate adjustment was effective August 1st of 2009. And it worked out to an overall increase of about 4.53%. And what we were looking for when we came in last year at November 1st, we were slightly less than what Clackamas County was in terms of our rate adjustment that we came in. But what I wanted to be able to discuss more importantly than just the adjustment was the actual rate design in and of itself. because Oregon City decided last year to take a departure from where Clackamas County had adjusted their rates. And in doing so, largely in part due on the economic crisis that we're all experiencing, the residential rates were lower than what those rates, the residential rates that we adjusted for Oregon City were lower than what those rates were for overall Clackamas County. And those of you who are not familiar on the Clackamas County rate proceedings, what Clackamas County does is they hire an outside third party to look at all of the garbage haulers throughout the Clackamas County area. They divide it up into different sectors. Those sectors are urban, rural, and distant rural. Our focus here tonight is on urban, and urban is those areas that have a tight grid system, pretty much what your typical neighborhood would look like. And in looking at the overall Clackamas County adjustment, as I mentioned, they went 4.53%, of which a large portion of that was attributable to the disposal fees charged by Metro, which are just straight pass-through costs that there's nothing we can do about. There's no way to contain those. The numbers are what they are. And then we also had the normal increases, the standard increases that we all experience, payroll taxes, health insurance benefits, and some fuel adjustments and those sorts. So Clackamas County went through and surveyed, I want to say it was 9 haulers or thereabout anyway, as to what the different rates were, and they did an overall composite analysis as to what the cost of service truly was. Typically, most of the haulers, or what the objective is to shoot for a profit ratio of anywhere of about 8 to 10%, and it's called cost of service, but in essence, you can multiply 8 to 10% times what your revenues are, and that's about where you should be coming in for. And those profits are used primarily for replacement of equipment, income taxes, and things of that nature. So it's considered a regulated industry mainly because you have a franchise district. So accordingly, one of the things that I was looking at was taking a rate adjustment of approximately 3%, seeing how much did that end up increasing what the cost was on residential and commercial containers, and we're not looking at adjusting anything else. So looking at those numbers, when we just take a look at a 3% factor, and just to let you know, the most common cart that we have in Oregon City is the 35-gallon cart. That would probably, Pam, is that about 70% or so? Maybe even more than 70%.
I'd say about 80.
About 80%. So when we take a look at our current rate now for a 35-gallon cart is $22.95. We're looking at a 3% adjustment. If we do that, that would be a 70-cent adjustment, and that would take you to $23.65. And those of you who are going to check me on my math, we rounded up on the nickel, so when you calculate that, you may end up seeing 3.1% or 3.2% or something like that. Clackamas County went through and just said we're going to raise it to the next nickel. So my 3% may not be exactly accurate, but I wanted to make sure that I've disclosed that. So that's looking at a 70-cent increase on the 35-gallon cart. On the 65-gallon cart, it's 97 cents. And on the 95-gallon cart, it's $1.05. So that's what we were looking at by just doing a 3%. And if we took it up to a 4.5% adjustment on those respective numbers, the 35, and this puts you in line with Clackamas County for what they did for this year, that increases the 35-gallon cart to, the increase is $1.05. The 65-gallon cart is $1.42, and likewise the 95-gallon cart is $1.55. So that was in essence what I wanted to be able to bring to the council to discuss, what those numbers were and if this rate design is in line with the thinking of council at this point in time.
Okay, Doug.
When you come forward to us I presume you're going to come forward to us at a commission meeting.
You are correct.
With a request. Clackamas County, It has the franchises, I presume, for the unincorporated urban areas, is that right?
Yes, you're correct.
I'd like to see the municipalities as well, in terms of their rates.
I will certainly provide you a summary of comparative rates for the Tri-County area, just like last year, and I'll show you what those franchise fees are for each one of the jurisdictions.
Okay.
Have they all been changed now? Because you said many of them were pending when you last spoke with us.
Pretty much are all changed at this point in time. We're going to meet with Gladstone this evening, and their rates will change, and Gladstone's going to do a mirror image of Clackamas County, but for the franchise fee, because Gladstone charges $360 a year for a franchise fee, where Clackamas County was a 5% fee on the franchise fee. And the franchise fees are kind of across the board, and I'll show it both in both ways, with and without a franchise fee. Milwaukee also did mirror image of Clackamas County, and so they're in the same area. And then what I was going to show you was going to be Lake Oswego, Gresham, City of Portland, and Tigard, and Tualatin, and Beaverton, if those are of interest. Beaverton may be getting kind of far out and not relative because it's Washington County.
Well, it's way bigger, too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, and it's really interesting because some of the different cities have a different mix where, like Tualatin, for example, they're very, very heavy on manufacturing and commercial, and so that helps subsidize the residential rates where we don't have the base that they have.
Okay. And I know when you talked with us before, you talked about, as the recession was beginning, there was actually, you didn't have, you were collecting from fewer people, I think you were talking about, and that the recycling was also kind of an issue. Can you address what's happened in a year?
I sure can. The recession's still continuing, even though the news media is saying it's over. I'm scratching my head saying I'm not seeing it. The main areas that you end up seeing that impact B&B is the fact that a lot of people ended up saying, we want to scrunch back as much as possible. So we've seen recycling more on the rise and more switches from people going from a 65-gallon cart to a 35-gallon cart, trying to make those conservation efforts. And that's in part, I think, due to the recycling, and I think it's in part because we've got the roll carts out now for the recycling, too.
It's easier.
Yeah, it makes it just a whole bunch easier. So we're seeing, those dynamics, and I don't have data that really gives me that complete correlation to say it's due to the recession or it's because it's easier and people are being more conscious. I just don't know. But I'm guessing that it's probably a combination of both, more than likely. And in the recycling markets, what we're seeing is those prices on recycled materials are just plummeting downward pretty rapidly. And Pam's just given me a sheet of paper here that's showing for residential curbside recycling, we're getting $40 a ton,
No, $5
or $5 a ton.
Yeah.
Oh, when you were getting $40 a ton.
Yeah, you're getting a lot more. And recycling's just been a tougher and tougher market. It's continuing to stair-step down. So,
Materials.
Right.
correct.
Yeah. We're having a problem with the glass because they charge us $35 a ton when we dump it. And,
They being Metro?
no, we take it to SP Recycling.
Okay.
And they've been having difficulty with recycling glass, and they have been shipping it by boxcar to California.
Well, that raises the cost.
So the monies that we make off of recycling, they deduct the glass from it, which makes it a little smaller.
Well, I assume that you're here because you need a rate increase, because obviously the tension between those factors, you're not getting the 8 to 10% profit margin. So you're not going to look kindly on us if we don't do that. So what would that do to your company if we said no, we can't grant that?
I would have to go back and recalculate where we are. Right now, we're below Clackamas County standards. We're not at the 8% return on revenues at this particular point in time. The numbers more than likely would put us down to probably around 3 to 4%, absent any type of rate adjustment. And I'll have more firm numbers when I come in for the presentation.
Yeah, I think the comparative numbers would be really helpful.
We just thought it would be best if we came to the work session so we
Gives us
could
a
all
heads up.
sit around and discuss any problems or issues or questions that you have prior to the meeting.
That's wise.
Yeah.
Are there any
Yeah.
to lay on the table?
Did you
Doug?
mention you're going to have West Lynn on your list or not?
I did not, but I will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other issues to put on the table or information you'd like to see when they return? Thank you. Have any more questions of
very
us? Okay, thank you. Next, as you know, we've been, let's see, we're over a year now after the parking study. I believe it was February 2008 when we began the parking study, if I'm not crazy. And we have been meeting with stakeholders around the region, and I think we're ready to talk about the I word, implementation.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the commission, we're going to actually go through three things. I want to just briefly as I can go back and give you a quick overview again of the parking study. It's been a while since we visited that. We did meet with stakeholders, and they did have some suggestions of some things that we're actually looking at as part of this implementation. I'm going to have Mr. Archer talk about those. I'm going to talk with you about an implementation schedule, and I've given you kind of a timeline on some of that, and then we'll show you some proposed new parking rates as well. So if you'll bear with me, let me go back to the parking study, and I'll run through this as quickly as I can. As you recall, the study was comprehensive. We did bring in Rick Williams, who has done a number of these things. Smart Park in Portland is probably one of his bigger programs. When we met with the committee, before we actually got into solutions and issues, we really talked about principles, and those principles is what defined the solutions to the various issues that we ran into. The committee also worked through what we would call a Parking 101, and we learned a lot about downtown parking and what's all involved. We did have stakeholder involvement. If you go through that parking study, you'll see a list of who all was part of that. And we did reach a good majority in regard to the recommendations that were forward. As you recall, we studied two areas. We looked at the downtown district, and there's two pieces of that. We looked at the Mill all the way down to 16th Street, and then we also looked at the subzone, which is the historic district, and I'll talk about both of those here in a second. Up on the bluff in 7th, we looked along Center Street from 2nd Street to 7th, and then up 7th to John Q. Adams, a block on each side from 6th to 8th Street, and that was kind of the boundaries of the parking study. What we learned is a little bit interesting, is that you do not have a parking supply problem. What we have is a parking management problem. We also found that downtown parking is confusing. Right now you've got 11 different categories that go from 15 minutes to 1 hour to 4 hours to 8 hours, and you have a mixture of different color permits. And because of that, anybody coming into downtown, a lot of times if you're new to that, it's just difficult to make a decision about where to park, and we've heard some of that. We also learned about the 85% rule, which says any time that you have parking that it takes up 85% of your parking or more, that's what's known as a constrained area. And normally in those cases, when you're at that limit, is people will make other choices. It's hard to find parking, and as opposed to drive around and try to find that open spot, they'll go elsewhere. We also found the length of stay in downtown, and let me kind of give you a quick look at that. Is, again, looking at that downtown zone, the average length of stay was 2 hours and 10 minutes. If you take the permit parking out of it, it was 1 hour and 42 minutes. We also looked at the 8-hour stalls, several of those along 9th Street. Is the average stay, and these are, again, 8-hour stalls, is 2 hours and 30 minutes. We also found that the 1-hour stalls are poorly utilized. They're being utilized about 54.5%. Reason being is because they're marked 1 hour and people need to stay a little longer, so they don't use those. Give you some quick characteristics of the downtown district. I'm looking at the broader district again, from the Mill down to 16th Street. Right now there are 1,019 stalls in that district. 392 of those are on street. 637 of those stalls are off-street. And most of those off-street stalls are privately owned, and that's part of the issue, even though if you look through the parking study, you'll see that there is a lot of parking capacity in those private lots that are not being utilized, and that's an issue that we're going to have to kind of figure out how we maximize our parking. Your peak hour demand in the downtown zone is from 10 to 11. But during the peak, you have 285 stalls, and these are the on-street stalls, are occupied, and that leaves 107 stalls unoccupied. Most of those tend to be north of 10th Street. So bottom line there is your 15-minute zones, your 30-minute zones, your 1-hour zones, your 4-hour zones, and 8-hour zones do not serve your visitors very well. If you look at the constraint or the downtown core, what you find is you have 231 on-street stalls, or it's about 60% of your on-street stalls are in that what we call the historic downtown district. And about 65% of those are 2-hour parking. In other words, 35% of those are designated as long-term or all-day parking. And during that peak hour is you are running up about 89.4% of those being occupied. So the historic zone itself is constrained, but when you bring in the broader area, you've got some parking availability. Also, if you brought in the private lots, you would have some parking availability. Easier said than done, of course, because we don't own those. If you look up on the bluff, you do have quite a bit of parking capacity. Up there, there's 1,631 stalls. 776 of those are on-street, and 855 are off-street. And the on-street usage during the peak hour on the bluff is 39%. So quite a bit of capacity there. Now, again, in doing anything up there, you're going to have to deal also with a residential zone, so that's going to take a little different. Yes? Oh, these just, this is all in the park. These are just my notes that I wrote up here.
This is essentially the presentation that he made to all the stakeholders as we went around.
But you'll find all those statistics and more in that book. I'm just trying to overburden you with all of those. So the question comes down for us is how do we maximize utilization of the total number of parking spots? And that comes down to a determination of what you're trying to do with downtown parking. And if the downtown parking, you're trying to do that in a way that supports a better, stronger commercial core, it comes down to a simple question of who walks. Because if you're going to have your visitors park outside the core and walk in, not going to be very successful with a commercial mix downtown. So if you're going to take your employees and others and move those to out of the core parking locations, then you can free up that on-street parking, and that's is going to make it a little bit more viable district. Now, then the question becomes, what do you have to do to make that workable as well? Because, again, you want to maintain an employee base, and you don't want to chase employers off either. The other thing that comes up right now is your parking revenues roughly are about $176,000, which we run the program. We do any maintenance on our parking, and there's also we run the shuttle out of that. It's not a lot of money to do all of that with. But right now, the people who pay that parking in Oregon City are the ones who carry that burden. So the question becomes, we have to determine who pays and what that equitable share is. So there's a number of recommendations in there. I'll give you some of the highlights of that, and I'll let Scott talk to you about some of the other recommendations that we've come up with stakeholders, and I'll go back to that implementation schedule. We did look north of 10th Street, and there are some places we think we can add at least 56 parking spots. That can add to the capacity. Again, that's north of 10th, so you still have that issue about who walks and that sort of issue, but we think we can add some on-street parking.
Larry, may I interrupt?
Yes.
With the new McLaughlin Boulevard project, are those added in? I don't think they are. Yeah, we've updated that.
Probably not. Would probably add those in. That's not a lot, but it's some.
Well, that's actually a few.
Yeah.
You'd meter on Highway 99 there?
No, just the number of spaces.
Well, let me come back to that question. Ask me that question again here in a minute. So, we're talking about reducing or eliminating the 15-minute, the 30-minute, the 1 hour, the 4 hour, and the 8 hour parking zones. So again, trying to go to 2 hours. Now, some of those, we're probably going to have some short-term parking somewhere in the core. Some of that's for loading, unloading, things of that nature, but that will be more by an exception, and we'll have to kind of figure out that process in doing that. We want to transition the on-street reserve stalls to either non-core or private lots if we can. Again, what we want to do is manage our downtown parking by this 85% rule. In other words, we can take action that drop below 85%, then we're probably where we need to be. But as that rises up over that 85%, then we'll have to take corrective action, so again, to reduce that stress. One way of doing all of that, of course, is revising your current pricing on parking. And not only that, but also it's a question of trying to provide the resource needed, because I think you're going to see as we talk here, we need to add an additional person in there. Again, if you're going to expand that parking district all the way down to 16th Street and take in the Bluff, that's going to have to be managed, or you got a nice parking program, no management, you probably haven't gotten anywhere with it. So that's an issue we'll have to work with. If we're going to move folks out of the core, especially employees, and we heard this a lot from several employees, that they're, I wouldn't say that people are unsafe, but there's a perception of safety, and that needs to be addressed. Some lighting needs to be talked about. One of the recommendations in there is to look at possible shuttle service. That's a little long-term, because how do you pay for that is one of the issues. So you're going to have to kind of figure out how you get folks from those spots. And, of course, not as big an issue in the summer, because we do run the shuttle. It's also light out. The weather's nice. But we're getting into the months where, it's dark and it's damp. Moving up onto the Bluff, we're going to have to expand our residential permit parking program to make sure that, again, you're not dislocating folks from their homes, both for them and their visitors, while you accommodate those folks that are being forced up onto the Bluff to park. But it is, it is adjacent to downtown. There's a place you can park, and you can get down. And again, we're talking about that stretch along Center and up 7th, and again, that's especially up 7th is the commercial core itself that's going to eat up some of that parking.
And in our stakeholder meetings, actually, there was I thought, a serious lack of awareness that area up there was actually so close to the downtown.
Yeah.
2 blocks from the courthouse.
We are talking about meeting, and we'll have to do this one-on-one with those individual lot owners. And again, I think if we can talk with folks about managing those lots and look at the whole downtown core parking as one resource and get them to work with us, I think we can maximize that parking. I think they can benefit from that. I think downtown can benefit from it. But you can imagine what that conversation is going to be like. That's going to take some time and some hand-holding and probably some trial and error as we go through that. I've already mentioned the year-round shuttle. That was one of the things that is marked in there. The other 2 issues is equity and funding parking. I think we're going to have some more serious conversations with the county, particularly if they're talking about expanding the courthouse, what are they going to do with that parking. And everyone we've talked to, they all understand that there's a cost in doing that. So it really gets down to all the parking we're talking about is there's no free ride, there's no free parking. So those spots along McLaughlin, I think we do need to look at some type of metering for that. I think what we do on the Bluff is going to take some type of, I'll say metering, lots of different ways to do that. But again, there's no free parking. It's a resource. It comes at a cost, particularly in maintaining it, managing it. That needs to be recovered. So that's a quick look at what's in that parking study, which is a lot more thorough than that is. But
Yeah, and then one more thing. Since we now have received the TGM grant for $35,000 to study multi-directional traffic on Main Street, that will have an impact on this as well.
Yeah, because we'll probably lose about 15 spots in going to two-way traffic on Main Street. So one of the recommendations of moving 20 spots to kind of get below that 85%, that's probably not a very viable recommendation if we go to two-way traffic on Main Street, because we're going to lose about that number.
Yeah, that probably should be a footnote on our implementation schedule. Daphne?
So when you talk about the shuttle, are you talking about the trolley?
It doesn't have to be a trolley. It could be with trolleys. Definitely, that's kind of what we have right now, but, there's no magic in the trolleys, even though I think, you could kind of, my personal opinion is you could make it an amenity for the city as well as you can accomplish kind of serving this need as well, so. And we have them. We would have to add to that fleet, and then you also have to go to full-time drivers, which is year-round, and so the cost of that goes up considerably. So with that, I'll let Scott talk about, we did meet with various stakeholders, and in particular, there were two things that we really need to add to this, and I'll let him kind of chat about those.
Thanks. We did have, at the Commission's previous direction, we held our 3 stakeholder meetings with... Pardon?
We had 5. We met with the presiding judge, and then we met with the county commissioners.
Yep.
Those aren't...
Yes, well, yeah, you're right, we did. I don't know why those aren't included. I guess these were the bigger group ones.
The ones where the recommendations come out.
So we held the meeting number 1 was the law enforcement agencies. I don't recall the dates of the other 2 meetings. I could go back and find those, but they were in the mix at the same time here. Met with the law enforcement agencies, the downtown business folks, and then the CIC in the McLaughlin neighborhood were one meeting together. My notes here are just basically all the kind of, I jotted down as many of the comments and feedback that I could get on paper, and that's all this represents. So I just putting that to you just for a little bit of an idea what types of things were brought up at least at these 3 meetings, and not necessarily representative of everything. I think for the most part, folks were pleased with the parking study, and my sense was that they supported it going forward. There were some comments, I think, especially in the downtown business and the CIC McLaughlin neighborhood, that they, some comments were made that this stuff is pretty straightforward, and let's try to get moving forward, at least, especially on the easy items or the low-hanging fruit. The moving the stalls out of the core downtown area and some things like that. So there was support. The two major recommendations that came out of this, and more related to the law enforcement concerns, because there were a number of concerns about just their ability to do business with the courthouse, and they needed to be there, and they needed to be able to park, and they needed to know that they could come and find a parking space. Where that recommendation would be that we would reserve 10 spots on the bluff for law enforcement vehicles to park, so they'd be designated spaces, and then they'd be willing to either walk down the stairs or ride the elevator into downtown and make that short trip. There was I guess a perception that the police agencies didn't want to park away from the courthouse. Well, that really, what came out of that discussion was that's not the case. They just wanted to know where to park and that they could park. And
was that all law enforcement agencies or just the Oregon City Police?
All. Yeah, we invited the county, our own police department, and a number of, there's...
what I'm asking is, as far as the willingness to park up on the bluff?
Most of them seemed willing.
They didn't really, I think,
accepted.
understand that was a possibility for them. I mean, it really was surprising.
Yeah, and they're willing also to pay for those spots, so it's...
I don't think we talked to any group that didn't understand that if they have a dog in the fight, they're willing to come up with money. They just want it to be fair.
Yeah. And with law enforcement, too, besides providing 10 spots, and again, there's going to be time that's going to be crowded, is we did mention, too, that we would assist them with any work they need to with any private lots to lease spaces. We've actually leased 2 spaces for our officers in Herb Arbor's lot, which is one across from the courthouse, and so, they were kind of interested in that, too, but that may or may not serve all of the needs, but they felt if we could find 10 spots and work that thing, as they could work around that issue. Understanding there's going to be times where they may have more officers than that downtown.
Daphne.
So with the courts, they didn't have any issues if they're bringing somebody in to and from court with a prisoner?
We're getting to court here. You mean you're talking about the police?
I'm talking...
Law enforcement?
Yeah, law enforcement bringing, yes, people.
Well, in terms of transporting prisoners to court, there is a Sally Port that is in the parking lot there by McMinimans, and that's where actually they take folks in and out that are staying at the hotel.
People in handcuffs going down the elevator?
Tourist attraction.
Yeah.
What we learned is that law enforcement really, it's basically for appearing in court. I mean, they sit and sit and sit and sit and wait till their time comes up, and then they spend 5 minutes and then they leave.
It's not their fault they're at the coffee shop all that long period of time.
Yeah.
So they tell me.
Yeah.
There were a few of those jokes there that I don't think they appreciated.
And I guess the other,
Well, gee, my apology.
At least it's coffee this time.
the other are the two main recommendations that came out of that discussion, with mostly surrounding the law enforcement issue, was to leave the 8th Street stalls in place.
Had to do with the courthouse, and we talked with the presiding judge, and the judge's issue, and you can look at it lots of different ways, but his is security of the courthouse. If he had his preference, and he understands that can't be the case, is that would actually be more of a plaza, so that you really wouldn't have vehicular traffic at all. But since we have that, he was very adamant that parking should be for court personnel only. And again, it is monitored with security cameras. Because, again, they're concerned about security not only of the employees there, but security of the courthouse. And so, though, we might have a little disagreement, and you heard some from downtown in terms of why can't those spaces be available after 5 and in the evenings, he thinks it needs to be around the clock. So, I think that's a minor concession if we can get these other issues dealt with.
And they were working on some reconfiguration around the courthouse, like putting some parking back. I don't know if that's done yet. They're working on adding some spaces themselves.
Now, the discussion, as I mentioned to you, there has been some discussion with planning about expanding the courthouse over the parking lot and going up. If that moves forward and there is additional parking needs, I think that's one of the conversations we want to have with them, is what's their solution here for that?
That's the parking lot adjacent to McManaman's?
Yes.
I guess to argue the point, I mean, you're talking to the presiding judge, I presume,
Yes.
when you're having
Judge
this
Maurer.
discussion. I would think the presence of regular citizens there becomes something that ought to alleviate some of the concerns about security. I mean, more regular people we have walking on that street and so forth, I would think the more secure it would be.
Yeah, I think in terms of the day-to-day going forward, I think what they're concerned about, they dealt with an interesting clientele, and sometimes people get a little upset. In fact, an aside that, in working through the Cove DDA, is that law firm had a threat going on, and they couldn't find the individual, and they had a lockdown that went on for about a month and a half. That you couldn't get in there unless you were escorted in and out. Courthouse runs into similar types of issues, and so what they're afraid of if someone is showing up with, like you saw on TV that one time, taking a gun and going after someone driving a car full of explosives up next to it or something of that nature. So it's what we have there is definitely not a fail-safe situation, and you could argue, does that have a lot of logic to it? But again, it's something that's very. It's of strong interest to the court. We're talking about 8 or 9 spaces and trying to get consensus and move forward. It's a small concession in all of this. So.
He really did go through some scenarios that let us understand how serious they really were about that.
They do deal with some unhappy customers from time to time.
Yeah. I think one more thing to point out is that another change that we'll need to look at is, if we're using the Bluff, is expansion of the elevator hours.
Yep.
That was mentioned particularly by law enforcement, that may not be quite in the time frame that they need. Rocky.
One thing I just wanted to mention, too, I think Commissioner Neely brought it up about parking spots up by City Hall where there's visibility problems. So I think in the whole grand scheme of things, too, we could be losing parking spots. I don't know. I use 12th Street a lot, getting on from 12th Street onto Main Street is a nightmare, and I can't imagine how, whatever happens with the intersection when it's done, but some of those on-street parking go right to the intersection, and you can't see anything.
Can't see.
And so I think, at least on the intersections, we might have to look at removing 1 or 2 spaces in some places, because there was a UPS truck of things parked there.
yeah,
but even when there's a car parked there, you have to pretty much
inch
get
out.
halfway into the traffic lane on Main Street to pull out. And so I'm sure there's other places like that.
Yeah, that's
so we're going to have to think about
It's a common issue across the city, and that's, we can remove parking. That doesn't necessarily solve it all, really, because it's a sight distance and how fast someone's traveling. But so the main thing is everyone has to use caution, both the pedestrian and the motorist, and I would definitely urge the pedestrian, what my mother always told me, stop, look, and listen before you step out there, because the other guy may not see you, and you pay the price.
There's a couple
Doug.
of comments on 12th Street. 12th Street's a bad one anyway, because if you're stopped at that line where you're supposed to stop, you don't have the sight distance
Can't
you
see.
need. You've got to advance anyway. I do believe that Nancy Krushar will find as soon as we open that 12th Street intersection with Laughlin, we're probably going to have to signalize that intersection very quickly.
And then signalize 12th and Washington.
Yep, that's what I
think
Center.
Just an aside to that, one of the things you have to keep in mind, though, and anytime you're putting a signal at an intersection where you've got a grade like that, and with
That's
winter
tough.
weather, you may solve the summertime accidents, you may create some really big ones in the winter.
They
So
have to
it's
stop
one thing.
there anyway. There's a stop sign. You got to stop there anyway.
Oh, yeah, I was up at the other
You're
one.
a different one.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think I think there were 2 really pieces of good news. The stakeholder interviews were really essential. They were a very, very important piece of the outreach that we did as a step 2 to the parking study. But it was really nice to have affirmed that Oregon City wants to create a vibrant and active downtown. And they bought into that. And while they thought there were maybe perhaps some communication issues along the way, they were really eager to communicate with us, and it sounded really pretty cooperative. And then when we met with the county commissioners also, I think that we have an opportunity to go back to them to talk about issues in which we have joint interests, like shuttles for employees, since they have the majority of the employees in the downtown. So what do you want from us?
Let me turn your attention here to this implementation schedule, and I'm not going to walk you through all this, but let me show you a couple things, because again, there's a lot of work that has to be done here, and it's not going to be without some grinding of teeth by the time we go through here. Everyone talking about it, but there's a lot of folks.
It looks
You should have it at your place. Yeah.
looks like this.
Yeah. You'll have a couple of those. You got one that has what I gave you earlier, and then you've got one for parking.
And then there's one with red on that says revenue.
Yeah, that's the wrong one there. Yeah,
That's
you
it.
want to.
Daphne, it looks like this.
Yeah, that's the wrong one you've got there.
You're looking at the...
You're looking at the
city projects.
priorities.
Yeah, it's probably right.
You want to pull that right there. Nope, go back behind that green sheet there. Should have 2 of them. That there and the one right on top of it. You want to pull those 2 out. Yeah. If you look through here, just a couple things I'll highlight. The creation of a permanent parking committee, I think it will be helpful as you go through some of the issues that's going to come up, is that you have a group that works with you on this. I think it also will help some of the politics around that. You will see things like item 4 where it talks about adding to the on-street system. We can begin that. There are some cost implications to that stuff, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that. Again, the revisions of the parking rates, and we're going to talk to just kind of give you a quick glance of that. All this is going to be coming to you at a city commission meeting. So one of the things you need to kind of figure out is, are you ready to move forward on this? Do you need more time? We got to get some of this back over to the county because they asked to look at the revenue side, and that's what we put this together for. If you look at things down me find it here.
Do you know what would be helpful to me? Maybe I'm the only one, but that the rates, which I think, are you going to talk about the rates projections?
Yeah.
Either to have a map of the downtown so we can see where that is, or to do a walkabout.
Yeah.
I mean, a map is fine with me,
do
but...
that. Yeah. It'd probably, this time of year, probably better to do a map, but we can get to that.
Yeah.
If you look at 13, one of the things that, again, came up in our discussions that we have to kind of figure out is where do we direct your parking to? Right now, they're instructed to park in the 13th Street lot. That's getting awfully crowded, and we're going to have to come up with some additional areas there and direct them that, and make sure that we preserve enough spots that they can go in there as well. And again, that's how do you get them in when you park them there? How do you get them downtown to jury selection? Because one of the things, again, we would be enforcing the folks who go play meter roulette are probably going to get nabbed. Not only will we have additional parking fees, but one of the things you probably want to look at is parking fines as well. And that's one thing that came out of the meeting with downtowners. If it's something where somebody is constantly violating these things, they kind of felt that maybe those fines should be progressive.
Yes.
You know, if they're a habitual offender, they should go up. One of the things they also ask us, a lot of times somebody will go to court, they get shipped off to jail, their car is parked downtown, they wanted to see us get on that faster and move that car, because sometimes it'd sit down there for several days before it would get towed away. So,
Jim?
Has there been a calculation as to whether adding a second enforcement person would pay for itself?
we're going to show you these rates, and you can kind of look at kind of where we're at. But again, in extending that zone all the way down to 16th and going on the bluff, it's going to take at least a person having, kind of one of the things we've talked about with this is kind of combining that person, if we could, doing both kind of supplement to parking and supplement to other code enforcement actions as well. So that's kind of what we've talked about. So Scott, I'll let you talk about those rates real fast, and if you got any questions about any of this, we're glad to try to answer them.
So there's a parking revenue projections tabulation sheet at your place. I'm just going to walk through that real quick. The bottom line, just to cut to the chase, is that if we, you can see in the very bottom right, the current revenue and then the projected revenue difference is about $342,000 or is it 342?
Yep.
Yeah, $342,000 difference. If we implement all of the fee recommendations in the parking study. And just to kind of walk through those real quickly, and if you have a specific question, I'd be happy to answer that. But going down the list on the left, the downtown district, these are the parking stalls and the meters. You're looking at going, by increasing from 50 cents an hour to $1 an hour, you'd be looking at jumping from $109,000 to $218,000. These are annual revenue projections. The north of 10th, basically right now you're not charging, and then beginning to charge, you'd increase up to $43,000. The bluff parking stalls, again, you've got...
I thought we were doing away with all the 8 hours meters. That's maximum.
That's out of the core.
Oh, just out of the core?
Yeah, those are out of the
Okay.
core. The on-street stalls on the bluff, everything is free. It's proposed that we would charge 50 cents an hour. That would generate about $34,000 a year. The permit parking, there's no change on that. We're already charging $35 a month. There's a projected difference in revenue of $2,500. I think that's just for some administrative difference charges, kind of a minor amount anyway. The rest of the permit stalls, you're basically looking at each one of those, the blue, green, and purple, just going to the recommended amounts, and the differences on the right there going from the current revenues to the projected, going from $27,000 to $44,000 on the blue, from $14,000 to $20,000 on the green, and $19,000 to $26,000 on the purple. And then in our daily parking lot, we're not recommending any cost changes. The increase in revenue by $5,000 is just potential increased business. So that's kind of just a snapshot. So yeah, a significant difference in revenue there.
And one of the things you want to think about when you look at these is, do we make this jump all at once, or do you do that in steps?
Also, just to mention, before you get into any questions, these revenues do not include any fines. These are just the revenues from the meters and the permits and so forth. So any fines are above and beyond this. So theoretically increased enforcement would also have increased fine revenues.
Jim?
I don't think they gave me an answer to my question about how much it would cost to add a second person. And I think there's another question, too, is the cost, for example, of charging up on the bluff. In many of these places, there are not meters, so there would be, I think, an investment in buying and installing meters as well. And so I think we need an estimate on that kind of cost as well.
That's why when you look at that big jump there, it looks like, well, that's a lot of money, but there's cost both in terms of the person you're talking about, as well as equipment, of course, then the maintenance of the thing that you have to do in terms of strapping, things of that nature. The salary range in regards to a parking enforcement officer is, you're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000 plus benefits. So again, you're looking at $300 and something thousand in increased revenues. Yes, you could add another individual there.
I have a question. A question. Do we know that? Actually, because of the bridge closure, is this a good time to implement that? Does it have some effect, no effect, or? I'm not really positive how the interplay.
That's not an administrative call.
Is that called passing the buck?
Let's go. That's a tough one to answer.
Well, no,
but it should be factored in.
It should be factored in, and I think that's a discussion that should happen with some of the downtown businesses, because we didn't talk about that as we went around. That was an external.
Well, this
Yes,
also ties back into that first issue that I mentioned to you.
Right.
I think you have to look what's on your plate, because though the people we've talked to, if you recall, when we first had this parking study, there was a lot of questions and a little bit of anger until we had a chance to sit down and talk to folks.
Right.
However, we've only talked to a smidgen of folks this will affect. So the question is, how many issues do we move forward at one time? Because there'll be a lot of folks, if you can sit down one-on-one, that understand it, but they're going to get secondhand information at best on all this stuff, and they're going to be dislocated. So it's going to be inconvenient for some.
Daphne?
When you said that about when are we going to implement it, that's what I had to laugh too, because it sounded just like another issue that's on our plate tonight. With the vendor cards. I mean, it might not be a bad idea, but it's the timing.
It's a lot we're asking of downtown at a time that they're being stressed by that bridge closure, so it's tough.
Yeah, I think we need to be as gentle as possible.
Yep.
So I think, I guess in the projections that, or the phasing, because I think it should be phased, that you bring to us next time, I'd like that kind of factor in, or maybe a conversation with Lloyd Purdy. Or
and I think at your council meeting, you're probably going to have some folks from the downtown that'll want to talk to you about this issue. I think what you're going to hear for the most part is going to be a little bit of a mixed bag.
Right.
If you're an employee down there, they're probably going to tell you to be lenient. If you're a business owner down there, they're probably going to ask you to go full force and do this, because one of the big issues that I constantly hear in trying to deal with vacancies downtown is the parking issue. And they'll tell you it's hard to find tenants to come in because of parking.
But while the bridge is closed, the downtown's going to have a little angst about being friendly to those who come to it. So I guess I would encourage you to be proactive in your next recommendation, that you might consider some phasing that would be gentle on the downtown. So maybe it's a 2-year phase-in.
Well, another thought here, and again, downtown could reflect on this better than I think what they would tell you right now, for the visitor who they're wanting to attract, it's unfriendly right now. And by implementing this, it would become more friendly. Now, for the business down there that's operating for their employees, it's probably a different look. So that's the problem. You got different users, and that creates different dynamics.
But I think we can maybe be sensitive to that as we consider the implementation. Other comments, Doug?
Well, I tend to agree with you on a phase, and I would suggest that we're talking about a 2-year phase, and I would prefer, and I'm talking specifically about the historic core, going from 50 cents to $1, that we don't raise it all in the first year so we can actually see what the impact of the bridge closure is on the downtown area. And let that hold. My concern is you might have some people that, in fact, well, I'd like to go to that coffee shop in Oregon City, but it's a lot more difficult to go there now, and I have to pay twice as much in parking if I go there. I'm just going to go to someplace else that I don't like quite as much. If we gave ourselves a year before we implemented the historic core 50-cent increase, I don't have that much problem with looking at the Bluffs parking and so forth, because although I'm sure we may get people from Westland on the Bluff, I think they more are likely drive-throughs from Oregon City than they are anybody who's coming in from the Westland side. But the other thing I was a little concerned about, though, on the on-street, on the Bluff parking, and maybe, again, having a map where the parking places are will answer the question, is a person only has to walk 1 or 2 blocks additional into a residential area to park and leave and be there, and if we're not monitoring that, it might impact the residents a fair amount.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, these are things we're going to have to work through.
Okay, and the permit stalls, I think that probably is mostly is employees, so those are certainly fair amounts compared to other communities.
Commissioner Neely and I must park in different places. He's talking about paying 50 cents to park.
Yeah.
Every time I go get coffee, it costs me $10.
Yeah.
I'm positioning myself so you can see what we're told is on the street there.
I know.
Exactly.
He's merciless.
I'll tell you, since he came on, he's worth 50% more in terms of giving tickets than anybody we had preceding him.
Well, I don't know.
One of the things that we'll need to look at eventually, too, is do we replace the meters with different technology? Because right now, if you go downtown, but if you go downtown right now and you pull into a spot that there's meter on, you don't necessarily have to pay. On the other, you pay and you put it on the windshield. When you drive off that space, you're going to have to pay again when you go in there. So it's a revenue issue that you may want to think about, too. And that's kind of one reason why some of those places have gone those smart park type meters. So.
I think it's also a convenience issue because so many people are used to pulling out their debit card or credit card or whatever.
That's the other issue that we hear. They don't have, a lot of folks don't have change in their...
Yeah, I think we should look into the solar systems if we can.
Those things stick to my window. It drives me nuts.
What? The what?
Those little things stick to my window. It drives me nuts when I park in Portland.
Oh, I think it's so convenient. I can do that now so quickly. It took me a long time to learn.
Portland State's parking structure, you just put the thing on your dashboard. You don't have to stick it on.
Yeah. Okay, that's a biggie, so we'll see it again. Now let's talk about Willamette Falls Television. You've been sitting very patiently there, waiting for us. So the intergovernmental agreement is before us.
Yes. Madam Mayor, members of the Commission, I'm going to give you a very quick overview, and I think the representative here from WFTV may want to talk to you a little bit about this as well. And I'll give you a little background on what we have and then kind of talk about the issue and a proposal if that's of interest. Right now you have a franchise with Comcast TV, and that's a non-exclusive franchise in which we collect 5% of the TV revenues. That roughly to the city, that's about $400,000 in revenues, of which $190,000 go to the general fund, and then we're putting $110,000 to cable TV operations. 32% of the 5% we transfer to WFTV, and that's for their operation, which is about $85,000, I think is what's in this year's budget, and they provide government and public access with that. In the past, that has been we've done that with an IGA that had with both Westland and Gladstone. Now, as you recall, about 4 years ago, Gladstone didn't feel they were getting the service for that, and they opted out of the franchise. I think they may be wanting to reconsider that now, but that's an aside, and that's something Gladstone had to speak for themselves on. In the last year, West Lynn has raised a number of questions. I think they've had some questions about the cost of service, and I think they feel maybe they can get that at a lower cost, or at least that was some of the discussion going on. They felt that maybe they could duplicate some of those services through other means, and definitely with all the technology we have, there is ways that you can provide some of that governmental access, but it may not be as broad-based as what is being done at the present time, such as web streaming, but a lot of folks don't have the web, and so those issues have come up. I think, too, from West Lynn, there was some issues in regards to the budget and expenditures. Anyhow, that led to a notice to withdraw that I think they forwarded to WFTV, and if that was the case, then you get into this issue of dissolution of assets, which puts Oregon City in an interesting situation, and we're going to have to work through that, as well as it puts WFTV in a very awkward position, because, you know, they've been moving into a new facility, and their major funding source is both the franchises from Oregon City and West Lynn, even though they have some contracts with some others, and that's a question, too, we've been talking about in terms of other entities getting that service, and you know, again, we're paying the bulk of that, and so how does that work? What is equitable here, and what have you? So I've been meeting with Chris Jordan, and we've chatted about that, and here's some of the things that we have talked about and taking a different look, as opposed to going different ways and dissolving this, because, again, I get a little bit worried about what may happen with public access under that scenario. Is looking at WFTV in a little different light, looking at that more as a communications center that does provide government access. They can provide these services for both cities. In fact, they've done it. If you go back to the original fire annexation, there was a big panel discussion that WFTV put on. We did those sorts of things. It's a good way to get information out, and adds another tool to that chest. We've talked about some type of improvement in the general management, both in terms of the operation of the station as well as the financial application. We've talked about maybe one of these cities assuming the responsibilities for the financing or the books like we do for South Fork, and I think West Lynn would be willing to take that on since we do South Fork.
I thought we were going to.
Well, that all has to be worked out, but that's a discussion there. We've talked about, too, the overall management of that, of the operations of the station being like other operations, which that would come under the, through whatever the management structure there, working directly with the city managers of both cities, and then the board changing that it really just oversaw the public access and the programming aspect of that. And if we came to that type arrangement, is restructuring the IGA between both so we could work that out. And again, we're not seeing separation of ways, and we work out a different arrangement here, how this works, and we still continue to go down the road with a new configuration of how this thing operates. So that's kind of the recommendation that you have.
So who would oversee the capital costs?
Capital costs, that would be, again, a management structure that would come through the management of the station, working with the city managers, and that's going to be a decision that, the commissions ultimately make, because that has to do with where you are transferring those monies at. The board itself would be working on the public access, the programming side of it, because I don't want it to, there's no way I want to get in to what goes on the station or not. That's,
Yeah, I can see us deliberating on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the new proposal.
Yeah, it's better outlined in that memo. You don't want to read through that.
And the proposal's on the back page.
And
page
then
2.
at some point, you probably want to have a joint meeting with West Lynn. Some of those concerns have been more of an issue coming out of West Lynn. Again, I haven't really monitored WFTV that closely, so, if I haven't had the same concerns, but again, I haven't looked at it that closely, so, and I don't know I don't think there's anything, I don't want to imply that there's anything bad here. I think it's just a question of not knowing more than anything.
So West Lynn is not pulling out?
It depends. If we can come to a different arrangement, West Landing's still a little split over there among their commission on this, but I think the majority of that says, okay, let's talk through this. I think that is a discussion that you probably want to have in some type of joint meeting. I do think we need to get this somewhat resolved. I know they need some stability here on what they're doing. And I think the board may have some different, they've been looking at some nonprofit issues, status. Again, I think that changes a lot if it's going to be done through a contractual arrangement, and particularly that contractual arrangement goes broader than just these two cities. I think that's going to raise some different questions for you to look at, because if other folks are going to be done through contracts, you're probably going to want to look at those costs similar to other folks. And I think one of the things, too, in managing this thing, if we're going to provide this service to other cities, is we want to see them paying on some type of prorated basis, on an equal basis of what Westland and Oregon City's paying for. In terms of public access, too, I think, again, if they're going to make contracts with groups outside of our jurisdictions, I think that's a little different scenario than working with groups within our jurisdictions, because, again, our dollars are going for Oregon City Westland residents. If it's another group elsewhere, that's a different arrangement. We've got to kind of talk through how that's done.
Okay. Daphne?
So, I have several questions. So, we're currently, both cities are paying $85,000 each.
I don't know what Westland pays. They pay a 32%, I think, of their TV revenues, and I don't know what those are for Westland.
So Melody's nodding her head there.
Yeah, well, the equity is in the percentage of income. So
from there.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So nobody pays. So equity-wise, you both pay the same, because you don't pay more than the 32%.
And it's 32% of 5%.
Yes.
So.
Right.
So on the number 3 here on this, limiting the Citizens Advisory Committee functions, and then to the CAC, which is the Cable Access Board, I kind of got lost on which committee was doing what there. I didn't get that. Who's the CIC?
Right now, they're doing everything.
Who's the CIC? Is it one of your committees, or is it our CIC?
Actually, some of our board members are here.
Yeah.
It's
The board,
3 from
board,
Oregon City and 3 from Westland make up the board.
Okay, well, I didn't catch that.
and I think
It's always been that way.
And you have two open seats
on each
from-
side
yeah.
right now. So we have 3 of our potential, other 3. We have one of our Oregon City members at home. He's convalescing and probably watching on Granicus, I hope.
Steve?
And then
He's going to get his halo off soon, I guess.
and then I
That
was
what that is. That's so funny.
I still have my halo.
I had to elaborate on that. What am I talking about?
well, then I was wondering about why you didn't get more partners. Why not the school district? Why not the college? Why?
Well, that's what we're working towards, and that's kind of was our objective with moving into this new center, is building a whole new place that would be more accessible and visit all those equity issues. So that's kind of where we're at
Do you
now.
work for the county?
No. We the county, though, is one of the service contracts. So we provide public access for them, and then they also, in turn, provide $20,000 a year for support of their users coming in, plus $19,200 a year in capital funds to help support equipment.
And that's why this whole who pays what and what's equitable needs to be looked
The county,
at.
we don't operate their channel. It's merely for people to come and get training and produce programs. We don't support any other service. So it's just for public coming in, because the county does all their own stuff. So all the contracts are really different, and this is why we talked earlier this year about a consultant potentially coming in and assessing everything we do, because we, too, want to know what's most important to the city, where we should be focusing, and having services assessed, and see how we can grow best.
Doug?
Is the revenue from the franchise fees from well, currently from us, but also previously from Westland, is that the majority of the income coming into?
Basically, everything's, it's about a third. It's a third our outside contracts, because they're smaller and there are less services provided.
Mm-hmm.
So Oregon City's basically a third, Westland's a third, and then outside contracts are a third.
Jim?
On the bottom of Mr. Patterson's memo, there's reference to a consultant to review the finances of the station and provide guidance to the management of those costs and the station's budget. Just want to know a little bit more about that proposal, where the money would come from, timelines, et cetera.
Yeah, it's just a proposal.
Yeah, it's one of those things, again, and this is an issue that came up more on the West Lynn side, and one of the discussions that first came up was, do we bring in a third party to look at that, and that's still a viable option? Do we move in this other direction and just to that approach to the management? Could we address those issues? I don't have the answers to that right now, and again, I don't know what everyone's comfort level would be. That's why it's going to take a broader discussion. How that would be financed, I think we're looking at part of this franchise payment that would be directed towards that. Again, depending on when you did it, you're probably now looking at sometime next fiscal year, and you'd have to budget that in.
You know, I'm not sure that the both councils meeting together is important. I wonder about a subcommittee. Would you
That would work as well.
send two?
That would work as
Two and the
well.
city manager to talk with two from West Lynn? We've done that in the past.
Be a good start, and then you could kind of figure out
Our
where you go
agendas are
from
so
there.
busy, I'm wondering if that would be you're amenable to that?
Yeah, and I'm amenable to whatever West Lynn wants to do. If they want to meet with the full commissions, I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to get all five together, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The direction you're looking for us at the work session is that
Wanna-
want to continue talking.
If there's anything here that strikes you as, that's not what we want to at least talk about, we probably need to know that. But we need to work toward resolution. Again, it's one of those issues that kind of we didn't really have on our plate, but if we don't resolve it in a way that the IGA breaks apart, it's going to force a lot of action on the part of our organization. That's why I'm just trying to figure out a way to make this work, and all parties can agree to. We need to move down the road.
Yeah, and over the years, we've had hot-button issues with cable TV, and with our work agenda, it's always been sort of, it's never been a front burner issue because we've been flying so hard working on our own things. But now and then we do have to address that, so I'm
To
wondering...
give you a feeling how complex it would become is, let's say the IGA broke apart. That has to do with the dissolution of assets which are owned by West Lynn and Oregon City. And so if we couldn't come to a meeting of the mind, let's say one party decides they're going to sell that off and we can't buy it, is what happens is WFTV, even if they wanted to go to a contract service, has no equipment. And so that doesn't work either. So, I mean, that's why all this, we've got to find some resolution here that all parties can agree to, or we're in an interesting pickle.
Who has interest in serving on a subcommittee if that's the direction we go? If we want to do the whole one, that's fine, but who's got an interest in this?
I
Yes, Doug? You might?
of course, I'm on a committee that nobody's ever called me to come into.
No more committees. No
You're
more
the
training.
nobody what?
Kellogg plant.
No more conferences.
Committee with Damon and Nancy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Okay.
waiting to be invited to.
Yeah, well, they're just getting that, they hadn't got it cranked off yet. They're still debating this.
Okay,
I just keep on wondering, am I missing meetings?
not yet.
Not yet, okay.
As they say, your
thank you.
time is coming.
Thank you very much.
I think this one will be fun. I'm not sure the other one.
No, it won't be. It will not be.
This will be way more fun. Okay, we just have a couple minutes, and I think this one we can probably deal with pretty quickly, and that is we have had an agreement with the Oregon City School District when the construction excise tax was first legislated, and then now there's been a change in the last legislative session, so this is Guy, are you going to talk about this?
Yes.
Okay. It's yours.
As the mayor indicated, the 2007 legislature implemented a construction excise tax as a trade-off rather than a systems development fee. At the conclusion of that legislature in September 2007, the city and the school district entered into an IGA that the city would collect those construction excise tax fees at a base of $1 per square foot for residential and 50 cents a square foot for commercial. And of the fees collected, the taxes collected, the city would retain 1% of that.
Can I just, did you say residential is $1 a square foot
That's correct.
and commercial is 50 cents a square
That's
foot?
correct.
That seems counterintuitive.
I'm not here to debate that.
It's the legislature.
There's also a limit on the commercial.
There is a $25,000 limit on the
There's a
commercial,
ceiling.
so there's a ceiling. So that was implemented, and the 2009 legislature, a bill was introduced 2014, which was followed by the Oregon building officials and myself, and was subsequently passed by the legislature with debate on all sides, to increase that 1% collection for the administrative fee by the municipalities up to 4% to make it more equitable. It was passed by the legislature, and under the bill 2014, it was to become enacted, or could be enacted 90 days after the conclusion of the legislature. That date was the 28th of September. So knowing that, I contacted the city attorney and ran this by him, and Bill put together the amendment, and I present that to you for approval. Basically what it is it's an increase from the 1% that the city maintains to 4%. So it just makes it more equitable, because we collect all the fees at the time of permit issuance and then pass those through. So it's just, we're keeping a very smaller piece of pie that we're getting to keep, so.
I think it's housekeeping essentially, but the only question or the comment I would have is that if it just a courtesy call to the school district so they know when this is on our agenda.
They've
all signed off.
Yeah, I contacted Ted Thurston from the school district, talked to him about it, sent him. They've actually signed their copy of it.
Okay.
And it's gone through them. They've signed it. Nancy Ide has that, retaining that until such time if this commission approves it for signature. The only recommendation that I would have is I'm assuming still needs to go in front of the commission, but I would try and recommend, hope that the commission could recommend implementation of this on January 1st, just for a housekeeping thing. It might make it a little bit neater to do that. So.
Great.
So
Any questions?
You don't want to make it retroactive at the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1st of this year.
Can't do that.
Yeah.
I know September. I know that.
We could try.
Yeah, lawsuits are expensive. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And there's any other things to come before us? We are adjourned, work session, and then we'll